Beloved, says St. Paul writing to Titus, God's favour has appeared. This is the word used here for charis, grace. It's the same word in Greek for grace and favour. And he goes on to illustrate in concrete terms what the outliving of that grace means. There is a sadness that comes to a Christian's heart when he sees that a person is exposed to much grace, and then, objectively speaking, is, as it were, pushing it away. A good example might be just the casual observance of the number of even professional Christians sometimes, in inverted commas, who think nothing about foul language, having earlier received on their tongue the Lord of Lords and King of Kings, to whom they and we have to render an account one day. Grace has demands. Grace is delicate. Grace is polite and courteous, and we must be the same. And he goes on collocating the whole game of the Christian life, the battle, the agonia, in terms of looking where we're going, which is a good place to be on this morning, the first time that we meet in this new year. He has, first of all, this list. The salvation that has been brought to all men trains us, he says, once we have rejected godlessness, translate, what is pumped at us from RTE, unworldly lusts, translate, what is soliciting us in the margins of the YouTube, to live a life of self-control, translate, bringing down the temperature, even perhaps at the driving wheel. Holiness, translate, an examination of conscience on the gallons of tea and coffee and the amount of grace and merit that goes therein, gossip. And piety, translate, how much time this year is likely, yes or no, to go into the vertical and how much into the horizontal. And of that proportion going into the vertical, how much will actually be engagement, soul to soul, and not automatic pilot. St. Jean-Marie Vianney Curé-Vars put it this way: some come to prayer as though it were just to have one's bit of duty done and to finish it as soon as possible. That one can actually come into prayer in such a way that one is getting rid of God from the day. Prayer, if it is authentic, is relationship, and as with two people in love, they always think about each other. So too with prayer. It is not a question of necessarily moving the lips. It's a question of perpetual engagement, thought and desire. Hence it is that the litmus test is there concretely, yes or no, obedience? For if we then down the line do allow ourselves, e.g., some of the issues I've mentioned, high volume and high temperature, bad language, interesting distractions on the internet, then that is not actually there. At least at that point, we are not fully engaged. I remember years ago in the monastic system making this interior reflection, seeing how particularly in a French situation where things can become fairly quickly fairly heated, e.g. if a machine doesn't work, one observes how, at least at that point in cosmic history, the explosive brother in question is apparently not in contemplation. And what has actually happened is that the ends are being lost from view. The immediate means has become the all, and that can happen. If it can happen in a monastic life, that the immediate means is the all, and therefore the end is actually being defeated by the bad way we do it, then we're wasting time. At that point, we're not gaining merit, we're drawing on the merit of the church. So that's a reflection as we start this year. Will our moments be stamped with merit or demerit? And then he goes into this, which is the ultimate end precisely. And piety in the present age, while waiting for the blessed object of our hope, the glorious appearance of our great God and Saviour Christ Jesus, words which have been resumed now in the present form of the Mass, which in our monastery, as I've kept actually at the Hermitage, are always sung. It's around the Our Father. In the old rite one doesn't hear it, but they've been expanded in the new rite. And it goes on to talk about the way in which the Lord has wanted to cleanse for himself a people of his very own, enthusiastic for noble deeds. This morning, after vigils, I took out the fortnightly collection of recyclable waste in time for the bins. And at that time of the morning, there's not a sinner in sight. And the moon was bright, and gazing down with that moon-like grin that it's had ever since it's been there, looking down at all our ancestors, calmly and serenely, reminding us that time is long but short for us. And he's been looking at us just as he was in bygone days, with this difference is that if the moon were able to speak, it would say, how that little ball down there has become noisy and agitated. A high proportion of its inhabitants are rushing through the days that I reflect. Rushing through the day. Well, I also thought to myself how in the monastery, on a daily basis, one of the last things I would do would be to fulfill the duty as chronicler, cronista in Italian, of the daily events. It had to be put into a chronicle, and that then, when it came to the bulletins for the people, the friends of the monastery, it would go into a succinct form, the main points of the news of the last period. And at the end of each day, one had to make a little filtering operation. What is worth noting? E.g., one day a helicopter landed in front of the monastery. Okay, put it down, doesn't happen every day. One time, the nuncio of the Holy Land appeared and no one answered the door. Little events which perhaps make little ripples, even in the Vatican. The reason was actually we were all in chapter and we couldn't. Another would be perhaps all the cows of the area came in on the feast of St. Anthony of the Desert. Whenever it was, that's when they're blessed, and they all wanted a blessing, the cows. So little events, not major history, but that was life. And on a daily basis, we have little things. So that's the visible element. We're writing those things on our history book. But and this is a reflection I made to myself, and I actually put it down on that day in a poem. That's not actually history. History is written in heaven. And what is being noted there is the merit, the love, the gentleness and compassion, the pluses that actually go into those little things. I've noticed that sometimes when people come in pain, it's a tiny, tiny nothing which makes all the difference. E.g., the way that a person who's being badly treated by a husband might feel the Lord himself coming through with a gentle healing power, through at last finding a listening ear and a compassionate look, and being shocked sometimes to see that actually she has dignity and merits the attention of a person without being judged or aggressed. It can be your ministry too. Little things, but they're the big things. And by the way, we know that that's the case when it comes to judgment. I remember looking at the account of Howard Storm, what shocked him in his near-death experience, because he wasn't a believer, was what was making a difference on his copybook was here and there the most unexpected and trivial thing. E.g., when he was at school, he would help a handicapped child. That counted a lot. So, that is what we're about to do. It's rather like this. There used to be a program on ITV, that's not the BBC, the other lot, in Britain in the 60s, called All Our Yesterdays. And it would go back 20 years previously, whatever it would be, e.g. 1945, in 1965, they would, to the day nearly, go back to what they had, events in the war and so on, bits of film, and it was something which brought back from oblivion moments that were. All Our Yesterdays was that program. Well, it's rather like that. Just by chance I opened this now because it would have been in some shape or form all our yesterdays. If one writes things, if one writes a diary either in prose or in poetry, those yesterdays somehow actually can relive. And that is what true writing is about. If one goes into a good autobiography, and there are, one picks from oblivion things which were worth noting. In school, because of his great vocabulary, we were given Winston Churchill to read at the age of 13 or so. It was My Early Life, and he would talk about the Boers and so on, and it was very good English, but also very good reading. And one saw from reading that, and also we were given Cedric Sassoon to read about things in his period. What was interesting, rather than the novel, the romance, was that this was actually video on paper. And by the way, you little ones, remember that. The less you have on video, the more you have your own internal video. And that's why the radio and the tape is actually better than the television and the screen for what it obliges the mind to do. But with regard to how we're going to write this year, there are hints to avoid pitfalls. One day, I was sent a Benedictine nun, to have a retreat, but there came two of them from the nearby feminine monastery, and I heard of a conversation which had happened between them and a guest who had happened to see them. They were all dressed in white, and what they had answered was this. The Italian phrase was I binari sono più sicuri, the railway lines are more secure. What they meant was this. The railway lines would be the timetable and the enclosure. In the specifically regimented life of a monastery, one is given the day that one will, as it were, photocopy every day until death. It will be each day the same. So there's not much new. But all that's new is invisible and going on between these hours of prayer. And then the hours of prayer themselves are either prayed or not, as are our rosaries, our liturgical celebrations here. Are we present or absent? Are we engaging or divagating and solving our problems? So these railway lines I would propose to you, not in a monastic style, but in some equivalent, because if they're not there, believe you me, you will find that this year too goes down easy holes of suction and attraction, useless conversations, endless cups of tea, unhelpful television, radio listened to and obliterating prayer in the day. Not to mention the more subtle and threatening ones, such as total engagement with the various forms of the virtual in the cybersphere. Out of control, I mean. Control. Being oneself in control. Which leads me to where I want to end. In the years in Italy, I noticed a progressive evolution. When I entered, it was still a period when the monastic life was not too much contaminated. Bit by bit, the choice coming actually initially from discussing with the novices who have more experience to bring in this umbilical cord of the internet, and then also to modernize the means of intercommon communication meant that in a short time, but a time in which the whole world was going in the same direction, one was no longer in the desert. One was in the agora of the big wide world in one's own monastic cell. If that's the case in the monastery, what is it out there without the railway lines, without the protection? You must have that violence of will to say this is enough on this bit of YouTube or whatever it might be, because no bell will call you, and if it's not there, this year will go down the drain, uncontrolled and with very little merit. So before it happens, let's reflect seriously on the use of one moment given once only in all eternity.
Cronaca. The monastery chronicle. Daily responsibility at Sant'Antimo in Italy. We trace the line of moments on a page that will to yellow turn and leave behind all trace but this of them that came of age and yielded unto seconds. This, the mind and minding well of riddles that hold all the meaning of a day. This little brain of memory marked and coded, this faint call of nothings ever wrought, will call again, 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 when we have gone. But none will turn to listen to a sound of matter made of naught. For we have done today as yesterday, as we were bound, and morrows have a pattern that we know, and there is little here, the truth to show. We shall bear you to all these your brethren. We shall bring you along every path. Be with us, Lord, walk at our side. The night nevermore shall come down. Walk with us now, and here abide, for the world that we tread is your own.
Domine